survived. That was a funny thing.
Okay, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started. There's still a few people out there ripping up stuff for the compost bin. They're going to come in and join us. Great job, evening class. You saw the difference in your pile compared to There's a lot of enthusiasm in the evening. Everybody's had plenty of time to wake up. We're going to go over a couple of administrative things we need to talk about. I guess the first one I should ask. The email I sent everyone out to everyone about composting, did I clarify things or make it worse?
Made it worse.
Made it worse.
I'll admit it.
Oh.
So if they're broad leaves, they're brown, and if they're green leaves, they're green.
If they're green leaves, they're green. And in most cases, say if you were to cut a limb that had green leaves on it, and those green leaves are going to turn brown, then those still have a carbon nitrogen ratio that would shift them toward the green category. If they're fall leaves, the tree goes through a process of slowing everything down, and that's why they change color. Everything starts to change physiochemically in the leaf, and then it forms an abscission layer that stops all nutrients flowing in and out of the leaf, and then the leaf drops off. So it changes over the course of time due to what the tree is doing to it. In order to let it go, it makes it then shift to a carbon or brown. It goes from a ratio of about 20 to 1 carbon to nitrogen to a ratio of 40 to 1 to 80 to 1 carbon to nitrogen. So that anything that's 30 to 1 or less, carbon nitrogen ratio is usually classified as a green. Anything that's greater than 30 to 1 carbon nitrogen ratio is classified as a brown. And I don't know if it came through during the video or the email, but I hope if you looked at those charts, what you see is that every organic matter, the plant matter and everything that we're collecting, has much more carbon in it than nitrogen. So the greens are greens not because they have more nitrogen and carbon, it's just they have a ratio less than 30 to 1. And like the grass clippings, I think is still 15 parts carbon and 1 part nitrogen. So it's still much, much more carbon than nitrogen, but it's less than 30 to 1. And that's what shifts it to the greens. So the greens are higher in nitrogen only because their carbon nitrogen ratio is lower. So you don't think of them as nitrogens versus carbons, you think of them as greens versus browns in the ratios. And the other one, the ratio thing, the rule of thumb I told you, is because if you're doing measuring by volume, a lot of times the browns are big and fluffy, larger pieces. The greens tend to be compact because they're much more juicy, and so they just wilt and melt together. So volume-wise, you usually do a 2 to 1 to 3 to 1 browns to greens. And if you're doing a weight-wise, well, you figure you got that heavy green that's all compacted. Well, it's definitely a gallon. That's going to weigh more than a gallon of brown, fluffy, torn-up cardboard. So if you do it weight-wise, it's the other way. It's 2 pounds or 2 weights of greens to 1 weight of browns. So the rule of thumb, once you understand what it's measuring and why it's like that, then it makes sense. Oh yeah, if I'm going weight 2 to 1 greens to browns, if I'm doing volume because the browns are usually fluffier, then I do 3 to 1 or 2 to 1 browns to greens. And you can actually go through and do the little formula if you want using the charts on what the carbon nitrogen ratio is, and you can figure it out pretty close if you wanted to go through calculations. But like Anna said last week, she just kind of looks at it and throws in this and throws in that and says, I probably need a little more of this. But she's been doing composting for a while. And you guys will get that way too if you really get into composting. We have we'll pass these around. Did you get the other one?
You guys grab
In that box, Eric, there's a little white box like that. Yeah. Okay, pass around there. You see what's nice about this one is for composting. It's got that little colored area that shows, okay, when the temperature is in this range, it's just kind of sitting there. When the temperature gets up in this next range, it's really working. When temperature gets up in the next range, it's like, okay, you've reached the hot stage now. And I think those are like less than 15 bucks or something, so they're not really expensive. And they go a long way in helping you monitor your compost pile, or take your soil temperature. If you want to take soil temperatures, you know, they always, a lot of times, at least further north especially, they'll say, when the soil temperature is warmed up to such and such, you can start planting your corn or your okra or something. Down here it's not as important, but you can measure soil temperature with it easy.
I added more bedding to my lawn bed and solved the problem.
Oh, good.
And I just got my moisture thermometer. I haven't used it for the lawn
It's kind
bed,
of
but it's check. I don't see them. I don't see any bugs. So
Good.
Good.
I like when the troubleshoot works. You guys can keep bringing compostable materials until the 28th of July. And when we come here, or when we're here, you're responsible for flipping it too. So you guys definitely have a lead on the morning class, but July 28th is the cutoff. The 28th.
And it's by volume
Huh?
or like awesomeness?
Finished compost, how much you got. And there will probably be some differences because you guys will not have identical products. Great. If it won't all fit, you know, we can kind of, if someone wants to get in there and stop it down.
Plus, you guys are going to be surprised probably if I get it, the moisture in there right and everything before we leave today. It'll be down probably that far at least by now.
we have to turn it with.
Well, in the greenhouse, there's some implements in this little shed. There's some implements. We'll make sure we've got.
Pitchforks will be the best probably.
Yeah, we've got something in the shed. I think.
How long do you leave the thermometer in the soil to measure soil temperature?
It doesn't take very long. It's just like a
minute or so.
It doesn't have to balance all, like for winterizing and stuff, like.
Nope.
that's it all.
He was asking how long you leave the thermometer in for measuring the temperature. And, you know, the little red tip that's covered, that's where it's really measuring. That's where the... and so, just a minute or so, you'll have that little bit of temperature.
Did everybody who missed lab see where we posted the lab videos? You guys were able to find them in the weeks that you missed? You guys got them? Any tech issues with the classroom logging in? I know I helped a couple of people before class.
You keep saying to go to give your questions and stuff. Well, when I went in there, you let me just get in there asking.
Yeah, we had the discussion board for the summer last year, 2020 class. You guys don't have one. If you'd like, I can set up a Facebook discussion class or group for the class. We've done that before. Is that something you're interested in? Yeah. Okay. I can do that and email the link to everyone. It'll be a closed group, just the morning and evening classes together. And you guys can kind of bounce ideas and ask questions, like a social space.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'll be good.
Yeah, I can do that one and sitting in Joe's doing plant pathology CSI. So.
And then maybe somebody else can answer it. Don't be bugging y'all.
Well, and we like that though, because
Yeah,
it's
that's
pure
really good.
discussion, and like I learn better when I'm working on something with other people. You know, first, like I like learning with him because we bounce ideas off each other, and I think that's a really important part of the process. Yeah, so I can set that up, and I'll get that email link out to you guys.
Yeah, good idea.
Housekeeping stuff. We have the file. We're still waiting to find out if we can share the file. The new manual. We have a PDF version.
This is the new manual you
You
have.
guys have the new one.
This printed one is the updated version.
If you email me, we can share it. Because that's something that you should have access to.
Yeah.
We're just waiting on the higher ups to give us the green light. That if anyone's traveling and needs the manual in a digital
Yeah.
form, shoot us an email.
Because you've already paid for the manual.
Yeah,
So it
that's
should be
our-
available to you. But it's the kind of, you know, like you said, the higher ups are trying to figure this all out. And do they want to make electronic version an option and not having the printed version? And if they do that, is the class cost going to be different? All those kind of things. But like our feeling is once you paid for the class and got the printed manual, you should have access to the electronic version.
Yeah, if anyone needs that.
We were just, you know, it's kind of like all things that it's yours, and you shouldn't, spread it around and share it with everybody. I mean, you paid for it, and it should be yours, and that's how we like to keep it. But of course, we can't stop that. But we want to emphasize we can give you guys electronic versions. Really, keep it for yourself.
That being said, I don't know if you photocopy pages of it and your neighbors. Do I care? Get that word out. Other housekeeping things? Do you have anything? We sort of started out with this, but any Q&A about this week's modules? Weed science, plant pathology. I know it's a lot of material to cover. This is your time for those questions.
If you have any questions.
The brown and green complexes that are comfortable with teaching in the video and slides. What are eggshells? What are they?
Technically, they throw them into the nitrogen category, but they're mostly calcium, right?
She asked, where do eggshells go in the brown or green category? Are they brown or are they green?
Coffee grounds are a weird ambiguous one.
Coffee grounds are one that, the reason they don't usually put in browns or greens, their ratio is about 25 to 1 to 30 to 1 carbon nitrogen. You can just take pure coffee grounds and have a beautiful compost plot that finishes and does everything without adding anything else to it. So that's why coffee grounds are more or less, you can count them as browns, you can count them as greens, whichever, but they're right in the middle.
They're magic.
Like fruit peelings, like the peeling of a watermelon or something?
Those are greens.
Okay.
So eggshells, what would you, I always think of them as like neutral. I just chuck them in.
Eggshells,
They don't really have a lot.
it's almost like adding minerals to the pot.
Because I think it was
Because they're very
just
young.
in one of the quiz questions, and I think in the video, I think they might have said it was green, but in the slide,
I've seen it on
it said it's
different
brown, so I was.
yeah. I've seen it on diagrams as both, or in one or the other, and then I'll find other ones where they talk about it as green, and it's really ambiguous. But it's like adding sand to the pile, and those eggshells are great because that is calcium that goes into the soil eventually. It takes a while to break down into small little pieces for the things to do a thing, but it prevents like all kinds of stuff. So, yeah. That's a great question. It's ambiguous.
With regard to the weeds, if I know you prefer to not till an area, if it's unavoidable and you have to till it up, before you start to lay down everything and plant and do what you need to do, is there some, I don't like to use chemicals, is there some specific thing that you would recommend to put down on the tilled up land before you start doing all of your planting? To stop like the seeds and everything that you tilled up?
He was asking if you kill it, you try to avoid killing, but if you kill it, there's something you should put down before you till.
Before you plant.
Before you plant, after you till.
Right.
Well, one good thing about, which is nice to do with tilling, if you have the time to do it, because it's going to happen if you've done something that, say you've covered it with something to kill the weeds, or you pulled all the weeds out and everything. When you till it, what you're going to do is expose some more weed seeds that were buried beyond germination belt or something like that. And so, if you can, kill it and then leave it another week or two and get rid of any weeds that pop up. And then mulching and then planting through the mulch is a great way because when it's weed free, you go ahead and put the mulch on there, you're going to stop a lot of weeds from germinating because of the lack of light. Even if they do germinate, they don't have the strength to make it all the way through your pile of mulch before they die.
I lay down plastic and I lay down mulch and I still have nut grass that pops up through it. So yeah, so I was wondering, like, so you just leave it for 2 weeks after it's filled up.
Well, the problem with the nut set is every time you till, you're propagating it because it's got those underground nuts, rhizomes. So you chop it up and each one of those turns into a plant, right? And then it's sharp when it comes up, so it pokes through weed barrier and mulch like anything. It comes through plastic mulch.
easily.
So with
Yeah,
that,
it's come through on time.
with that, we talked about IPM this morning in morning class, integrated pest management. You see it a lot with insect management, but it also pertains to weed management. The sedge problem, yellow nut sedge is the #1 weed problem in the world right now.
That's what Dr. Ron tells
That's
us.
what he keeps saying.
We said it a bunch.
So it's one where, okay, tillage doesn't work, mulch doesn't work, hand pulling, you'll never pull it out. Every time you pull, you leave the nut behind, right?
You can
what we-
reduce it, but you never get rid of it.
Right, and for a large area, it's impractical. Herbicide, selective herbicide. And there's a product called Sedge Hammer, which is sedge specific, that knocks it back down into the soil.
I guess I was just trying to get like the original earth that I was using as clean as possible before I started.
If you can screen it sometimes, that helps, but that's time consuming.
Right.
And-
I've
and-
seen people do it.
Yeah, and the thing with that, if you do, like I said, you can have clean soil if you screen it. But if you have a raised bed and you screen it, and you got it nice and clean, and your neighbor has weeds, it's not gonna be long until they're gonna be in there. So, you can start clean, but staying clean is the trick.
My friend told me she makes this mixture of like dishwashing detergent and vinegar and water to kill weeds. And I didn't know if that was a good idea or a bad idea.
Okay, did you guys hear that? It's all over the internet, and a lot of people say using water, dishwashing soap, and vinegar as an herbicide.
And we see it with Epsom salts and kosher salt too.
I think
None
she
of the
puts Epsom
recipes
salt,
are
too.
consistent.
Yeah, she puts up with salt.
Terrible idea for a number of reasons. It went viral on the internet, so now everyone's doing it, right? It burns the weeds down. It doesn't kill the roots at all. And I've tried this at my house. I spent a lot of time during the pandemic trying all the social media cocktails for weed, homemade Roundup, homemade weed killer. I found a bunch of them. I tried them. They do not work on New Orleans weeds. They might work in Minnesota. The reason they don't work and they're a bad idea is because they don't kill that root system. They just burn down whatever's there. If there's any mature weeds, it's not going to touch them. It'll make them a little crispy, but that's about it. At the same time, you're salting the ground.
Because a lot of them call for
Yeah.
salt
And
in the
all-
recipe.
That Dawn dish soap is petroleum derived. Also, it's in there as a sticking agent. It's not a good thing to have in your soil either. So you're basically poisoning the area you're trying to control the weeds with this organic or eco-friendly stuff. And it's not either one of those things.
Okay.
So we tell people that's the biggest, I'd say that is the biggest garden myth or like social
Right
media
now.
thing right now is the homemade Roundup. So a better option, there's organic chemicals that do the same thing. They're usually orange oil or clove oil derived. They're kind of pricey. You can get them at most garden centers now. If you don't want to use any kind of herbicide that's synthetic, there are organic options.
Are those okay? They don't hurt the soil?
Yeah, they're great. They break down. They're usually an organophosphate.
A lot of the herbicides break down in the soil too, though.
They do.
So it's not just where they break down.
They what? Yeah, they're not selective. So that's the thing about the organic products. They usually cost like $300 a gallon for the concentrate. But you can get a little like a Windex bottle size container full for like under $30.
If those are organic ones, do you still have to worry about phosphate poisoning?
Not with organic ones, they don't have organophosphate. in it.
Okay,
They have a phosphorus. It's not organic.
Organophosphates, those are very powerful pesticides.
Right.
That's not what's in
It's
the
something else,
organic.
phosphorus.
And you can actually probably find some of the research goes. Ron Strahan, remember him? He gave the talks. He has been, he does a lot of trials, and he did trials with using the internet homemade recipes of organic herbicides, and he bought some that are commercially available. And he tested them all, and then we had a field day where he was telling everyone. And the number of organic herbicides that did as good a job as some of the chemical herbicides was
Wow.
0.
And
And a lot of them he showed where you apply the organic herbicide and you might go out there next week and it looks pretty clean. Then you go out there a week later and they come back. Because like Anna said, a lot of the organic herbicides do not go systemic.
They burn down.
They burn down the tops. And the vinegar one, that one, they actually sell vinegar as an organic herbicide, but it's roughly, I have to check again to make sure, but I think it's at least 25% acetic acid. Vinegar that you buy in the store is about 5%. It's not even close to what the ones are that are touted as herbicides as far as their concentration.
And they burn your skin if you get it on you. You have to be very careful with the organic crops.
But the ones that are sold as herbicides.
What I do
because
like
it's so
about
concentrated.
those organic Windex bottle size ones, the clove oil and the orange oil stuff, is if you have like a patio or a sidewalk crack situation and it starts to regrow, hit it again. It starts to regrow, hit it again. And eventually you might starve whatever nutrient resources it has off, you know, underground structures, the roots, the tubers, the rhizomes, but you have to stay on top of it. The better option is a little handheld propane torch or a weed burner, which is fun, right? When I was in undergrad, we did research on, it was basically like, it looked like a tiller pulled behind a tractor, and it was a bunch of propane torches to burn everything. So,
Take the Rambo approach.
yeah, and it works. And then the best option is your two hands, right? Just get out there and pull those weeds, and there's no shortcuts, right? So two
Well,
hands.
like you guys know, and like Anna said earlier, if your two hands are pulling yellow nutsack, you're going to be pulling a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
you can just go out there
But eventually
every
you
day
can
and pull
deplete the
it.
population.
But with the propane torch, when you're doing it, usually it tells that some are sold as, you know, killing weeds. You don't just fry it and then move on. You actually want to fry for a little bit of time, but you want to heat up the soil underneath there and kill the roots too. If you just burn down the tops, that's no better than putting some of the other stuff on.
Does the heat, I'm sorry.
There was a question back there.
You were mentioning orange oil and lemon oil. Can you use orange oil and just squirt out of a bottle, or is it the actual?
It's an actual super concentrated version. The essential oil version doesn't really work. Some of those are pretty caustic though, so I've seen homemade recipes with it. I have not tried it because of the price. It's cheaper to go get the actual mix. Yeah. I've seen the cost breakdown in a couple of, like Mother Earth News, I think, did an article on it, and it's cheaper to just go get it. Well, if you go to any garden center now, and this is great, it's a recent development, they will have organic OMRI-approved herbicides in a little spray bottle. They usually have orange oil, citrus oil, something like that, or cloves as the base that they're using. So,
A note about that, citrus oil interacts with the sun and will give you blisters over time.
yes, and it's better to spray that stuff on a sunny day though, because if you spray those oils, even if they're organic, on the plants on a sunny day, it makes them wet and dry. So that's a good thing. Okay, you had a question.
If you burn the weed, does that kill the good organisms in the soil if you heat up the soil?
In that little pocket,
Yeah,
yeah.
they'll repopulate like within hours.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
Yeah, you figure a bacterium in a 24-hour period can go from 10 bacteria to almost a million. It doesn't take microorganisms long to repopulate areas, you know, whenever they're knocked out of small
even the
spots.
bigger stuff, it'll move in the soil. The what? I can't hear you.
What's the cure
Oh,
give solution to
cat's
cat's claw?
The nuclear option.
The best way to get rid of vines like that, cat's claw, because you want to use a systemic herbicide. That's the only thing that's going to actually get them. If you pull, you're going to have a lifetime job. But rather than try to spray the plant that's growing everywhere, find where it grows out of the ground, cut it. Now all that top is going to die, dry up, and go away. And as soon as you cut it, paint that stump with concentrated herbicide like triclopyr or glyphosate, something like that is a broad spectrum systemic herbicide. And in a fresh cut, the plant will take it into its system and spread it throughout the root system. And you do that for a few times. Every time you see it pop up, cut it, paint, That's the best way to get rid of it, because if you try pulling it, then you're breaking it. So if I had a vine here growing up and I cut it and painted the stump, all the root system is going to get that herbicide in it. If I go over here where it's popping up and pull it first and then cut this one and paint it, well, where I pulled it right here, I broke the root system, so everything outside that's gotten broken now won't get herbicide, so it's still going to live and come right back up. Cat's claw is a real bad one.
The cat's claw too, like speaking from experience, you have to hit it a couple of times. And when I say a couple of times, it might be 12 times, it might be 15 times. Yeah, it's bad. And it will cover a house, right? We've all seen that around town. It's lovely when it flowers. But we had a member of the Horticulture Society actually take the time to get his crew to dig the root system of a single vine out. And it looked like 30 sweet potatoes daisy-chained together. So it's got all that sugar, all those carbohydrates and starches to fall back on as a food reserve so it regenerates. You have to kill what's underground, and it's a lot of biomass. That's why it takes
Have you
so many
ever
times.
gone down and seen what's called a cat's claw? Yeah, it's usually a cat's claw, it has have a little bulby thing, then it goes down skinny, then it has another one, it has two of them.
It daisy chains them together.
And again, I said, that guy also brought in one that he dug up, and it was that big around, bigger than a basketball.
Really crazy.
And it was just sitting there in the ground if you hadn't dug it up, waiting to send out roots and shoots and everything.
Yeah, that's one of them, and we've got a vine station in your weed science rotation tonight. Well, you'll see some of the other culprits too that we are very familiar with around town with the K-Radia and whatnot. So
And you can dig them up and sell them up north. They sell them up there.
they do actually. Yep.
Because it gets cold enough in the winter to freeze them. So up there, you'll go and you'll find them. Cat's claw vine, these beautiful yellow flowers. It's going to cover your harbor in one growing season. And it's $25 for a 1 gallon pot.
That's this idea. Somebody do that.
You'll be rich.
Yes.
So sometimes pulling weeds is like a zen.
Yes.
However, after seeing the videos, it scared me, but I had so much, or still do, so much oxalis. And of course, it's a little both, but then sometimes you kind of, and they just kind of spill out over. So I have an established garden. What I did this year was I took cardboard and covered the whole thing, and then got some soil from my Buddha,
And backfill.
and then put it on top of the cardboard and then put mulch. Because I already had established plant plants, so I wasn't looking at planting anything, but it seems like every season, or even beyond that, I mean, I pull them out and then they're
Yeah, you can kill yourself trying to dig the
Yeah.
oxalis out. Everyone knows what she's talking about, the little 3-leaf clover looking stuff. It's sour
with
if
the
you
balls,
taste
and
it.
then you just
Yeah. They're beautiful. I personally
They're nice
leave them
flowers.
because I've got so many perennials it outcrowds them, so it's just like little accents. But smothering them with cardboard, that's a good strategy here, by the way. And cardboard is a really nice free resource around town. Just go behind the different stores. They're happy to give it to you.
Yes.
And the ink is soy-based, so there's really no like issues. You can layer cardboard and then come in with mulch or soil over the top and then cut holes and plant into it. And it looks great. And it works because it's smothering everything that's trying to come up. The only thing that really goes through it is the nutsedge. But the oxalis will not, and it's a great thing to do. Yeah, and that's what they did with the Big Lake in City Park, the Big Lake native plant area, kind of by the swan boats. If you guys haven't checked that out, go look at it. That was a mess. It was overgrown. It was neglected. All they did was come in with a truckload of cardboard and some mulch, and they basically started over by smothering, and then they cut holes and put all their perennials in, and it looks really good.
For the smothering method, you want to use cardboard as opposed to like tarp or like landscaping plastic.
Cardboard works better, but you could use
Versus what?
I use like a tarp or the landscaping plastic.
Oh.
that's solarization. We talked about that in the morning class too. It's best to use a clear plastic and wet the soil underneath it and then bury the edges. And you create a greenhouse effect where it will steam on hot days and get further down in the soil profile to kill things.
But it will also, I know she asked, but somebody was like, oh, that's a terrible idea because it will kill all every good thing. But
Oh, the good things come right back.
okay.
Yeah. You will
And you
never
can
get
use
rid of
the
good things.
plastic as barriers. That's what a lot of landscapers call it and everything. They don't actually solarize the soil. They act as
Just a
a
barrier.
mechanical barrier, or physical barrier to stop the weeds from growing. Those work fine too. The difference with using cardboard is that it's going to break down. You're adding organic matter to the soil.
It's
Using
cheaper.
the other stuff is not going to break down and add organic matter.
No, you have to make cuts. And with that plastic too, I used to work as a landscaper, and it sucked when that plastic breaks down. It turns into these threads of black plastic everywhere, and you can't shovel through it. It's terrible. So I tell people not to use that, and I push them towards the cardboard option because it's free too. And the roll of that landscape cloth is what, $60? Yeah.
But for the cardboard, is it like lay it down at the beginning and then put your like soil and stuff or like a raised bed on it?
Yeah, that's
Go
what I
above
did at
it?
my house actually. If you're
Okay.
starting a new raised bed, okay, put down cardboard over your grass or whatever's there. Build your raised bed on top of that cardboard. So you want the edges of your cardboard to go slightly outside of where you're building your bed with wood or cinder block, whatever, just to have a little buffer, and then fill it up. That's exactly how I did my house.
But if you're trying to stop weeds and you put down cardboard and then put soil on top of it, you're not going to stop the weeds.
There you go.
If they're in the soil that you put on top, you're not stopping the weeds.
It smothered them and it worked.
And
Oh, but if-
it'll only kill the ones below the cardboard.
Yes, it won't kill
It
anything.
won't
in
kill
the soil.
anything that you're adding with the soil that you put
No,
in
but
it.
that's what we were just talking about.
Okay.
Just one glass, yeah.
But
at
then
my
the
house,
one you
that's
were
what-
talking about with cutting the holes to put the plants in, is that after you have like an established sort of soil system that you're putting it in, then you're putting the cardboard on top of it?
You
and
put
then
your cardboard
planting?
on top of your garden soil, your compost and everything. You prep your bed first, layer cardboard, layer mulch. What is great about that is it will decompose, right? And then I can come in and throw compost over top and then another layer cardboard, another layer of mulch. It's like lasagna gardening. Yeah. And it works great here.
Does that concentrated vinegar work to kill weeds, or
It does, it's kind of expensive though, and it doesn't
But it
work
has
as
it's the
good.
same effect though, it just burns the tops.
just the top?
Doesn't
It
go
works-
systemic and kill
It
the
works
weeds.
better on broadleaf species that are under 4 inches tall, so we're talking seedlings. Does not work on grass. Thank you.
So what if you are saying that you build a raised bed on top of cardboard? What if you use like that weed barrier stuff?
You can put, if you never plan on digging down further than that, it's fine.
I'm just wondering, like, is that what you break down like cardboard, right?
It doesn't, no, but it is permeable.
No roots can grow deeper than that.
Right. Yeah. Which I also don't like, because eventually, in a perfect system, that raised bed would kind of be a part of the soil profile and just be an extension of it. Right. That's a great question. Other questions? Before we
Use
jump
your
into
plant pathology.
plant pathology CSI, Dr. Joe's got something fun cooked up. Okay, you got him, Joe.
All right.
Hope it's not raining. Go check.
Yeah, see if it's raining yet.
Yep, we will.
Okay, you guys all saw the plant path videos and good stuff. So what you have, this is a handout from Ohio State University. And they got a couple of them that we're probably going to load up some more references on the site for you. Forgetting, had a little bit of time to quickly read through this. If not, we're going to go do something. But I told Anna, I said, this is kind of like plant CSI, because that's what you're doing whenever you have a sick plant or a situation. You're trying to figure out what the problem is, how to solve it, and what to do in the future to prevent it. And so, in order to do that, you got to gather information, gather data as much as you can, because you want to be as right as possible with your answers. Because just think about it in the sense of medical. If you go into the doctor and he does a quick examination, diagnoses you with something and starts giving you medicine, and then he was wrong about his diagnosis, well, first off, the medicine is not going to do you any good. You might get worse. And in the medical field, depends on how bad it is, you could get sued for malpractice. Well, luckily plants don't sue us. That's why I went into this field instead of anything else. But the same thing would apply with your plants. If you go out and you diagnose a problem and then start treating it and it's not diagnosed correctly, you're just wasting your time and wasting your money. And we actually see that pretty often. We'll get emails saying, with pictures even sometimes saying, this is what's on my plant. Can you tell me what to do about it? I've been spraying it with fungicide for a month now and it's not getting any better. And so we have to email them back and say, well, your fungicide is not going to do any good because you have insects. You don't have a fungus problem. And so they didn't go through this kind of exercise that you guys are going to go through today. If they did, they wouldn't have misdiagnosed their plant and been wasting their time. So, since there's no questions on plant pathology, we're going to go ahead and go out in the field. That's what we're going to do. We're going to go outside and do a little plant CSI. You guys, what's that? What do you need to take with you? If you take your sheet, that one handout, it has 20 questions to ask. Now some of this is the ideal that you would go through and do with a plant. Now sometimes, once you've been doing it for several years, things like that, even you guys probably, some of you can walk up and look at something, you recognize right away what it is. And so you don't have to go through the 20 questions, but it's a good exercise to go through. Plus, there are some examples on one of the references that we're going to post after the lab today, and they talk about examples, especially a new disease comes in to the area. And if someone goes out, an experienced plant pathologist, an experienced agent or something like that, looks at it, and they say, oh, okay, yeah, I know what that is, that's such and such. And that has happened with several examples where they, for maybe a couple of years, they're being misdiagnosed. And then finally someone goes through and says, okay, this problem is occurring too often and people are using stuff to prevent it and it's not working. What should I do? And then they'll go through, they'll ask all the questions, they'll take samples back, they'll analyze it, go through the whole process, and suddenly they realize, okay, for 5 years, this disease that looks like this other disease has been being misdiagnosed. And the problem with misdiagnosis is that, say that disease comes in on a potty plant, someone got a shipment from Tahiti, and they look at this plant and say, it doesn't look quite right. So they call me out as an ag agent and say, can you tell me what's wrong with this plant? And I go out and I say, oh yeah, I've seen that before, that's such and such. And I say, okay, what'll I do about it? You say, okay, you spray it with this, treat it with this, it should be fine. You won't kill the plant. Give it a few weeks and go ahead and sell it. Now I misdiagnosed it because I thought I knew what I was doing, didn't go through the whole process. Now they sell that plant. Or they put it in with all the rest of their plants. Now all the rest of their plants get that same disease that I misdiagnosed. And now they sell that plant. And now that disease gets spread further and further and further and further. And so one misdiagnosis can lead to a pandemic or an epidemic. So I'm saying that to stress the idea that yes, you can know what you're talking about and be pretty sure, but don't be overconfident. So this exercise that we're going to go through is a really good way to go through and figure out what might be a problem. So, scroll out through it. Okay, so now here we are. We have a problem. So what's the first thing we want to know?
What plant?
What the plant is. So, anyone know? Japanese doesn't know yet. Nope. You see, this is where there's two ways you would find out. Now, if I was the client, you would ask me, well, what is this? And that's the thing with plants and knowing what a plant is. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of plants. And no one can easily identify everything. Usually, whatever you're passionate about in the plant world, you get pretty good at. So, identifying something, if I love some types of plants, then I'm going to be able to identify. If I'm a salvia nut, I can probably look at a lot of different salvias and identify them all the way to species, even to variety. But if I just know that salvia has, you know, this certain quality, I can say, well, I can tell you it's a salvia, that's as far as I can go. But then someone standing right next to me, who's a master gardener who just loves salvia, they can identify things I can't identify. So I say all that to say it's not a fault, and you don't want to be embarrassed about not recognizing a plant. If someone asks you, what's wrong with this plant? And you don't know what it is, the first thing you want to know is, well, what kind of plant is it? You don't know. And so you would ask the owner, and they should know. If not, you can use your botany and try to identify it. But to save us some time, I'm going to tell you, this is an avocado. It's an avocado tree that we have growing here. And so now we know one part of it. But as with a lot of things, a lot of plants, there's not just one variety of it. So we only don't, with this, we don't want to just know that it's an avocado. We say, well, what variety is it? And so I can tell you with this one, this is a Hass, or a Hass, however you want to say it. This is a Hass avocado, H-A-S-S. This one ever produced fruit? Not to my knowledge. So now we know what it is, and so now we know, well, what does a healthy avocado look like? And sometimes if it's a plant you're unfamiliar with, you might not know what it's supposed to look like when it's healthy. That's the great thing about smartphones and the internet now. You can always pull up pictures and descriptions of what a healthy plant should look like. I didn't go through the other one. I have to go to that one and go back in here.
I was just thinking that.
So, I can tell you that, okay, looking at these branches, that's more or less what a healthy avocado should look like. You got these nice, you know, large leaves, so, you know, not real supple, but a little bit tough. About that color green, usually not much darker. The new foliage is a little lighter green. The color of the leaves overall is about that dark. So this is what healthy avocado foliage and plant should look like. But obviously, it's not 100% healthy because we got some dead stuff in it. So this is what the healthy part should look like. And if you're actually growing in an avocado grove, you know, you stand back and look at it, it's usually a single trunk, with, you know, more or less a tree-shaped plant. So that's what the avocado would look like. And so you're looking at this, and so now the next thing is, okay, I know it's an avocado, I know it's a Hass avocado. Now, one of the things you want to know is, okay, what are some very common problems? So what are the things that I'm most likely to run into with an avocado plant?
Freeze.
And those are things you can find online. Freeze is one of them. Another, anthracnose, armillaria root rot, avocado black streak, bacterial canker, branch canker and dieback, fruit and stem end rots, fusarium dieback, phytophthora, fruit rot, phytophthora root rot, phytophthora trunk canker, rosalinia root rot, sooty mold, sunblotch, sunburn, verticillium wilt, and then mites, thrips, loopers. All of those things are, quote, common problems with avocados. So the first thing you do is look and say, well, you know what mites and all those insects cause. I don't really see any insect problems, so you eliminate the insect problem. And you're looking and saying, well, if these leaves and everything look healthy, this is dead. Now if you see it early, you say, okay, was it dieback that went like this all the way to the ground? Is it dieback that went from the ground up? What type of dieback did it have? You can eliminate some of the others, but what you're trying to do is narrow down the problems that might be. So from this, looking at it, you might say, okay, it could be bacterial canker, it could be phytophthora root rot, it could be anthracnose, or armillaria root rot, I mean. It could be freeze damage, it could be verticillium wilt. Those are some that are possibilities. And then you start eliminating those. But what is the overall general health of the plant? That's another thing you want to know. So how does the plant, this part of it look?
Looks good.
Yeah, so looking at this, looks pretty healthy. One of the information you might want to know is, what's the soil test analysis? Did someone do a soil test on it? What's the nutrient level in the soil? Well, if someone tells me, well, I haven't done a soil test on this, and so I don't know what the nutrient level is, but I can look at it overall and say, well, overall it's got nice green color, it's growing, so it doesn't appear to have any nutrient deficiencies at all. So overall, the health of what is alive here is pretty good. No nutrient deficiency, anything like that. And so then what is its problem? What are the symptoms that we're seeing?
I think the trunk is fairly healthy because there's new growth coming off of it, except for branches. You can see healthy new growth coming off the
That's
same.
actually from
Is that another
Trump.
trunk? I see another root. I haven't been there yet, but I'm seeing this little trunk. This is a healthy
Yep,
trunk.
it's a healthy trunk from this trunk.
Another bud is unhealthy sprouts.
So what are the
But it's
problems
dry
you're seeing?
and brittle.
And dry and
So
brittle.
I'm thinking it was frozen from the winter.
Has some death.
Leaves. And it needs to be.
That might be your recommendation, but
It needs to be
if
pruned off.
it has a disease that's going to spread, and you start pruning, and you got parts of it that are alive, and you prune to those, now you spread the disease to those healthy ones. So you don't, I mean, in a lot of cases you can jump to conclusions and start doing things, but what we want to do is work through the process of this one. So dead limbs, dead trunks, definitely it has a problem, and that could be the problem with it. And then you look around, what about other plants around it? Well, they move more avocados around it, but in general, what about the plants around it? How do they look? Pretty healthy? Well, they look like they're growing pretty well, no problems.
I think that like a fungus in the soil, wouldn't you see dieback on some of the healthier things, which we're not, I don't think we're seeing?
If we're a root rot, the way they kill entire trunks, or they can kill entire sections of a tree,
But
a
I've
large
seen
plant.
sections start to
No, but this whole thing is dead.
Right.
This whole thing is dead. So it could be a root rot that's done this.
Yeah, is it green on those dead trunks
There's one or two branches on it
that are alive?
that are coming off the dead. And you see like this one right here, there's a green one coming right from that. And you know you follow it up, that one's dead up there, but it's not dead all the way down here. So there is some green sprouts coming from it. These big ones that have lots of green on them, those are coming from, see this one's growing from, this one and this one are growing from this dead trunk. So with that being the case, then the death of it by something that's systemic killing the roots, if it killed this part of it, then it should have killed this part too. Okay, it's probably not a root problem.
go back.
Yeah, it looks like it froze to me.
We're working through the list.
I know.
And so we looked at, and what about the site? The environment around here. And I can tell you, avocados don't like wet feet. If it were to have, we were to have lots of rain and it was in a poorly drained area, you're going to get something like this. It'll kill it. It drowns the roots.
Well, we had lots of rain. We had lots
We
of
haven't
rain.
gotten to the diagnosis yet.
We had lots of rain and there's no standing water, so I don't think it's that.
I think it's got good drainage. And another thing which you'll learn with some of the weeds that you're going to look at, you can look for indicator weeds too. There are certain weeds and plants that like water sod soils, and we aren't seeing any of those. So we think it's probably got pretty good drainage. Overall, the health of the plant looks good. Probably got good nutrients. And we looked at the site. Who knows the most about that plant? Well, I guess I do about this one. So that's, I would be the person who talk to and ask the questions. And okay, when did the symptoms first appear? I first noticed this in early March. I can tell you that. That's when the symptoms first appeared. And then the horticultural history, like when was it planted? This tree was grown from an avocado pit. They started it from a pit and grew the tree. That's one of the reasons probably you've never seen any fruit on it. Avocados take 15 years from seed before they'll start flowering and producing fruit. You never want to start one from seed unless you're in kindergarten.
How old is this tree?
This tree has probably been here in this site for about, probably, well, you see that it's been cut back before, so it's probably been around 10 years or so.
So the next graduating class may see.
So, the horticultural history, so know some of that. And what about the environmental history? What do we know about the environment that we've had recently? And freeze in February, right before the symptoms appeared. And so, and then the diagnostic tools we're using our eyes. There's a whole list of things we can use. If you have your hand lens, if there's problems on the leaves, we can go up and actually look closely and try to figure that out. But we're about to reach a point, and saw in the video, if we wanted to be 100% sure once we diagnose something, take samples, send them up to the lab. The same thing a doctor would do. So with all this together, what's your diagnosis of what happened to avocado?
It froze.
Freeze damage. Yep. That's what happened to it. And so what would be your recommendations to the owner?
Prune it back. Prune out the bad stuff.
Prune out the bad stuff.
Make sure it's well-drained area.
And cover it next year.
Right up there.
Cover if it's not cold weather.
Yeah, protect the soil comfort from the bottom.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, if you mulch around it, that would tend to keep the roots warm. I would make a recommendation. I would say plant a cold tolerant variety. Pass is not cold tolerant. There are about a dozen varieties that can grow in our area and sustain the freeze. Yes.
I had a lime tree that did the exact same thing at the freeze, and I covered it, didn't help at all. But somebody suggested to me on the New Orleans swap buy trade site to possibly spray it with a hose so that it would freeze and insulate itself. Is that something that
That's something they do a lot in a lot of areas, especially in California. Large orchards, if they're going to have a freeze, you spray the whole thing and get an ice sheet to cover it. And when you do that, what you're actually doing is essentially setting the temperature right at 32 degrees. It's not going to get much colder than that below the ice. So it insulates it to the freezing temperature. But now if you have something like this, and you do it, it's going to still kill it. Because 32 degrees will kill this.
okay?
The covering with ice has to be on plants that say they can take temperatures down into the upper 20s. It's going to drop into the mid to lower 20s. Go ahead and coat them with a sheet of ice, and you'll protect them somewhat.
Okay, great.
So it depends on what the plant is. Whether
So what would you say the prognosis for this tree is? It's gonna be fine.
if you
seems
prune
like
out the
stuff
dead and
is
leave this,
growing.
it'll be fine until the next freeze.
So is it still on its clock to getting fruit in 5 years?
Every time it freezes like that, it slows it down a little bit because that's new growth coming up, especially depending on where it comes from. Now, stems that are coming from the old trunks that froze down partway, those probably in another 5 years or so would start to flower if it doesn't freeze all the way out. And so then we're giving our recommendations, and that's what we would tell the person. So this is a biotic or an abiotic problem? Abiotic. And so with this one, you wouldn't tell the person not to worry about it spreading to any of the other plants that they got. Yes, Richard.
So when a plant is sick, obviously this is just a freak, but when a plant is sick, can we assume it's systemic?
No. There are a lot of plant diseases, especially if we came out there and this one had leaf spots all over it. Usually leaf spot diseases aren't systemic. They're just killing the leaf and the tissue that they're on. Like one of the most devastating diseases on citrus right now is citrus canker. It's caused by bacteria. It doesn't go systemic. It only kills the tissue it's living on, the little area it's living on, but it's so easily spread that if this were a citrus tree and had citrus canker on it, I walked by like that and then walked over to one that didn't and brushed it with my shoulder, I probably spread that bacteria now to that other tree.
Will the wind spread it as well?
Wind will spread it. Rain will spread it. A lot of new insects and diseases come into areas whenever hurricanes go through, because it picks them up one place and carries them all the way with it to a new place. And that's if you go through the history of quite a few insects and diseases that we have in Florida, Louisiana, Alabama, Texas that start there. They're first reported there in the U.S. A lot of times they've come in with hurricanes. So now you see how you would go through and diagnose for me. What time is it? We might have... So, let's walk back this way. We'll do another one quickly. And then go inside, look at a few plant samples, and then we'll go on to weeds. Were those privet or were they straight wood?
I think they were privet.
I think they're privet.
They were privet.
What happened?
Here now we're going to stop and look at this one. We got a call for someone and say, I had these little privet hedges growing underneath my Chinaberry tree, and now they're all dead. What happened? So the first thing we want to say, okay, look at it. There's a privet, and you look at it and say, okay, we know what it is. What are some common problems? They have root problems. They have leaf problems. And then you look, well, every single one of them, it seemed to happen. Is there something wrong with the soil? Well, the tree growing in the same soil looks pretty healthy.
Not the weeds.
So I don't think it's a problem. Here's an oak popping up. There's another little plant popping up. So it doesn't seem to be. There's another one. Maybe wouldn't say there's a problem with the nutrients in the soil, especially as healthy and green as the Chinaberry tree looks.
Yeah, but no weeds are growing.
Yeah, so you're looking at the plant. What's wrong with it? There's a few weeds here, but there's not many weeds. And you would think, well, healthy soil because we've got a Chinaberry tree growing, but we don't have a lot of weeds growing. We're looking around at all the other plants. It seems like every plant in this area was affected by whatever's killing this privet hedge.
It's also surrounded by asphalt.
What about?
Okay, she said maybe the Chinaberry tree is giving off something that's killing it. That's a possibility. So you would check that out and see, does the Chinaberry tree give off anything?
What about traffic? Trucks going by.
Traffic or trucks going by, it might have compacted the soil. So, and one of the things in there says you could use a soil probe. And the one that Dr. Ron uses all the time is just a very long Phillips screwdriver. And you can tell if you have compaction. Well, with that stick, okay, I can go down pretty easily, and yeah, it doesn't really seem to have a heavy compaction there. The soil looks really nice.
Pretty.
So I could take samples of this and I could send it back, but if you look at the well drained, the sending in samples, they don't want samples that have been dead for a long time because it's hard to find living organisms, because once they kill a plant, they move on somewhere else unless they leave reproductive parts behind. But the biggest thing on this one I'm looking is, like you pointed out, is like, okay, these guys are dead, but there's nothing else growing. Nothing but that tree.
This has been sprayed with Roundup.
Yeah, somebody sprayed on it.
Herbicide. They intentionally kill these, but this has been sprayed with herbicide. And so that's another thing, when you see bare soil like this, that tells you there's something wrong. We visited a planting of oaks by the city, and the oak trees were probably a good 15 feet tall, trunks this big around. They've been there for a year or so, and the oak trees are starting to die all along the neutral ground that they had them planted in. All the oak trees are dying. And so I visited the site with Dr. Ron and Dr. Raj, and we were looking at it, and one of the things we're walking around and he was saying, this grass has no weeds in it. There are no weeds in this grass. Aha! If you have grass with no weeds in it, you're using an herbicide. So he said, okay, what herbicide did they use? And there are certain herbicides, and I think the one they used was MSM turf. It's great for killing weeds, but on the label it says, do not use it near oaks. Oaks are very sensitive. Even in small concentrations, oaks are very sensitive to MSM turf. Wow. So the city was spraying herbicide to kill the weeds and killing their oak trees at the same time because they didn't read the label.
Is there something you can do to like regenerate that soil, or?
Oh, the soil is fine.
Like,
You can't grow oaks in it. And there's certain things because another guy using MSM turf didn't read the label. He bought it, and his wife said, oh, I saw this article in the newspaper. This is great to kill the weeds in the grass. And it said use like 1 teaspoon per 1,000 square feet or something. And you thought, I'll just put a tablespoon in it, per 5 gallons. And then spread it around. And he had crepe myrtles that were as big as this Chinaberry tree that he was killed because he didn't read the label and follow the instructions and the directions.
Once that happens, can you regenerate?
For him, MSM turf is actually one that stays in the soil for a while. Our recommendation to him was, if you want to grow anything, buy bags of activated charcoal, mix that in the soil. The activated charcoal will bind the MSM turf, put it out of action. Do a lot of watering, leaching away some of it if you can, but he had a real problem. He had poisoned his soil for growing virtually any broadleaf.
So
This is herbicide he killed it.
it's like that insane guy that killed the oak tree in Auburn.
Oh yeah, he did it on purpose.
He purposely did it.
Killed the Auburn oaks.
The Auburn oak tree because they lost. Terrible.
what do you do? How do
He
you kill
killed it. He put the oak tree herbicide all over the tree and it killed it.
Yeah. So anybody have any questions on the process or procedure of identifying problems with plants? The signs of the disease, which is the fungal mat growing on top of the leaf, but you're not getting rid of the fungus that's living inside the leaf. So you wash it off and it looks really nice. And a few weeks later, with conditions, if it stays moist and humid, the fungus will be coming back. So soaps and things like that are a surface type approach to controlling problems. And so they don't go inside and get rid of something once it's inside. And that's the problem with a lot of plant diseases. Once you see them, they've established somewhere inside the plant. There are some that don't do that, but if they have established inside the plant already, anything that touches them just on the surface is not going to work. You need to use systemics then to go actually inside the plant. So I did a quick walk this morning. It only took me about 5 minutes walking through the Botanic Gardens to do this. So, but this one, what's the plant? That's the first thing I want to know. Banana, nope. Belvedere, nope. This is one that if you're from North or South Carolina, especially North Carolina, you probably recognize it.
Tobacco.
Tobacco. This is actually the Perique tobacco. So if you're from the river provinces, you might know it too. And so what would we say then, if this is what normal looks like, what is abnormal about these then? Browning, yellowing, spots in it, holes in it. Yeah, so this could have multiple problems. It could have insect problems. This type of look is I would recognize that as an anthracnose, so it has the fungal problems. The yellowing could be due to the fungus. This looks more like another type of like a Cercospora leaf spot. In fact, we got lots of problems on these tobacco leaves. But what you'll notice is these leaves, if you look at them, especially on the plant, these were the older leaves. These were the younger leaves. So it looks like it's, mainly a problem on the older leaves. This is one you have to decide, okay, is it something I want to do something about or not? Do I just want to cut off those bad looking leaves and then let it go or not? And then this one, what's this plant? Eggplant. And I'll tell you that I had the hardest thing for me to find. There's probably a good 50 eggplants growing over there in the gardens, in the botanic gardens. The hardest thing for me to find was this. The healthy looking one, yes. And as someone pointed out in the morning class, what do you know about this leaf by looking at it too? It's young. It's a young leaf. It's wilty, but it's a young leaf. It's much smaller than these leaves. So the only way I was able to even find one that looked somewhat healthy was get a young one. And that means I got it before anything else happened to it. And so what this will also show you is those eggplants right now, they're still making fruit, still getting, harvesting from them. So what this shows you is that in a lot of cases, now this is starting to get a little extreme, probably needs some control measures. In a lot of cases, if you have plants that have some problem with them, if it's not nutritional, but it's maybe an insect problem or maybe a little bit of a disease here and there, a lot of times they can tolerate that and still produce just fine. So another thing you want to take into account whenever you're thinking of control measures is, okay, how important is it? And that's the one in the question where it asks, what's the significance? What's the significance of this that I've just diagnosed? Is it going to cause enough damage to warrant control measures, or are control measures just something to make me feel better or to make something look better superficially, but it's not really going to improve the quality of the plant or its production? So those are decisions you have to make.
So
Yes.
But if it's a certain bug, maybe it could be affecting a plant that's nearby. Should we take into account too that it's a certain insect, will it, even though it's not affecting the fruit of that, will it be in the garden and attack other?
Right. Did you guys hear that? What she asked was, well, if I'm looking at something like this and it's an insect, and I say, well, I know that my eggplant can tolerate that insect with no problem. It's not going to eat the fruit. So for my eggplant, it might be fine. But if I got the eggplant growing in amongst some other plants, let's say I'm growing lettuce and eggplants at the same time, and I have worms that are eating the eggplant leaves, and the eggplant's making fruit just fine, I say, okay, I don't have to worry about controlling it on the eggplant, but the same insect also likes my lettuces. And when it's eating the lettuce leaves, I'm definitely losing product when it's eating my lettuce leaves. It's causing major damage to what I'm going to get from the lettuce. So in this case, if that would be the case, then I would say, well, I definitely do need to incorporate some control measures to at least stop it on the lettuce, if not to stop it on the eggplant so it doesn't move from the eggplant to the lettuce. So that's a good point to bring up. And also, I just, we talk about normal and abnormal. Well, if this is the hardest thing for me to find, is this really the normal? Or is this the normal? This would be the abnormal. So rather than normal and abnormal, what we should be talking about is healthy versus has some type of problem. So we don't say normal, abnormal. That's really not a good approach, because this is more normal if you go walking through the garden over there. Yes, Richard?
So, when we see, let's say, this plant, with these problems, we assume that the plant is not as healthy as it could be, as it's on the soil, the roots, or is it just the nature of the plant to be attacked by insects?
Okay, did everybody hear the question? Yeah, so it all depends on what you diagnose it with. Like with eggplants, these not only have all these holes in them, all this stippling, you know, that discoloration there, that's caused by mites. Sometimes you'll have flea beetles. And with eggplants, you can have the healthiest eggplant growing in the best location, and those insects, they don't care. The eggplant actually cannot resist those. Now there are other types of problems that may come along, especially a lot of times with root problems. They attack stress plants more so than above ground problems, because usually the root problems, if you got root rot or something happening, a lot of times that means you got poor drainage or something like that. If you have that, then you have a stressed plant. Stressed plants in general are more susceptible to everything, but there are some insects and some diseases that the health of the plant makes no difference to them. They're going to attack. But it's a good point. Yes, Pete?
Are there just the holes in the leaves, or are there other problems?
On this?
Yeah, you have more than one problem.
Oh yeah, this one not only has holes from armyworms eating it, but it's got flecking from, in this case it's spider mites have been feeding on it. I don't see any disease, but if I look hard enough, if I go back over there, I bet I can probably find a disease or two on it too. Yeah, I mean the green, if you look closely at it, you can see, yeah, stippling. Yeah, stippling on it. And so it's not solid green behind the hole. If it were solid green, it would be better for it as far as production wise, but it's not. It's got other problems. Yes, sir. Eric asked about neem oil. What is it? Is it different from other oils? How does it work? There's in the Geno Gardening magazine, I forgot which month it is, but there's a whole series that we publish on these alternative approaches to pest control. We really discuss neem oil and everything about it, but in quick answer to that, go and check those, because we kind of think that we put a lot of work into the Geno Gardening, and so the information there is scientifically based, and we try to be pretty thorough. But neem oil comes from the neem tree, and the neem tree is actually in the same family, the same genus as the chinaberry tree we were just looking at. Neem oil is they take they express the oils out of the nuts primarily, the seeds, but it's in all parts of the plant, and then they fractionate it. And so most neem oil that's sold as neem oil is 95% fractionated from the neem oil that's the raw neem oil. It's a alcohol extraction method they use to remove the oil. So that's what's sold as neem oil, and it functions against insects. It primarily smothers them against fungi. It can cause membrane disruption. So there's different things like that that the neem, and it can do the same thing to insects. So neem oil will work, and it can kill things. But there are then also other products in the neem plant, in the other fraction that they've taken out and separated. One of the big ones is azadirachtin, which is an active ingredient in a lot of systemic insecticides and has fungicidal activity as well. So the neem plant has a lot of good things in it that give us these organic type control measures. But neem oil itself is just that 95% alcohol extraction part, and it works good.
Would the neem plant itself be a great companion plant?
Yes, would the neem plant itself be a great companion plant in your garden? Well, one thing about the neem plant is it's a tropical, so it doesn't survive the winters here, kind of like the avocado. But also companion plants, I think I mentioned this at least in one of the sections early on. The companion plant idea that growing one type of plant will help to protect plants around it from insects and diseases is never been able to be shown to be true under scientific examination. Now what happens is, let's say like you have rosemary. If you have rosemary growing, there's a lot of insects that don't like rosemary. There are some that like it, mice in particular. But if you wanted to plant say rosemary in your vegetable garden to keep the other insects away, the chemical compounds in the rosemary that repel the insects are in that rosemary plant. They are released if it's agitated or brushed. So if you had some way of these types of plants that you plant as companion plants, that you had something that kept them constantly agitated so that they were constantly releasing these products, then they will protect your plant. But otherwise, they are keeping those products to themselves until something agitates them or causes them to release them. So companion plants don't really function that well. Well, the wind, every time it blows, but you'd have to have a constant wind out there blowing, because the wind blows, it releases it, the insects stay away, and the wind stops. The insects say, okay, there's this plant I want to eat. I don't care if it's next to this other plant. I go in there and eat it. The wind blows, okay, I'm leaving till the wind stops. Now I'm coming back.
What about marigolds for rabbits?
For repelling rabbits?
Or for like, distracting them, like, oh, here's a yummy snack.
There is the other thing of trap plants, and that's a whole different concept. What you're doing is planting a plant to actually serve as the point for all the problems to come to. And just like I was talking about eggplant, if you have flea beetles in your garden, they love eggplant number one. They will go to the eggplant first, compared to all other plants in the garden. But the thing with trap plants, what you're doing is you want to trap the insect, essentially. And to do that means you get them all to go to this plant, and then you have to destroy that plant somehow or kill all the insects on that one plant. Because if you plant eggplant in amongst your other plants to keep the flea beetles off, and you let the flea beetles go to your eggplant and devour everything on it, and you still haven't killed those flea beetles, they're going to say, I'm out of food, now I'm going to move to something I don't like as well. So a trap plant that you don't actually treat as a trap plant can make things worse. So you do have to, as a trap plant, treat it as a trap plant. It's one that you're going to destroy once it's got most of the insects that you want to control on. Yes, Richard?
So these leaves are all chewed out. Doesn't it interfere with the photosynthesis?
Yes, it does. But there's been a lot with certain crops, especially the ones that are commercially grown. There are formulas that the growers have that research has been done. They'll look and say, okay, let's say corn. If 25% of the corn leaf tissue is removed, either mechanically or by insects, 25% of the leaf tissue is removed. That doesn't affect the production of the corn from that plant at all. So they've done a lot, there's a lot of crops they've done that. They've done research that, okay, it can lose such and such percentage of its leaf tissue. It's not going to affect the outcome of the production. And so they will tell a grower, okay, you monitor your corn. Once you reach 25% leaf defoliation or leaf damage, you better start doing something, because if it goes beyond 25%, you'll start to lose production. But up to 25%, if it never gets past that, save your money. Don't go out there trying to control it, because it's not going to give you any return. And so that's why a lot of leaf damage, yes, it definitely affects photosynthesis, but will it affect production? And that's what the bottom line is on something like that, like eggplant and stuff. Is production effective? Okay, we're going to move on to weeds. Take a quick break. Just want to break it.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
We got to turn the camera. If you're still in here, you can go through the samples on your table. There's usually 3 to 6 samples of weeds on each station, grouped roughly by category. You're going to work through your worksheet using the fact sheets and articles on your tables. These are all easily accessible web resources that we just printed out. So they're usually LSU resources, other land-grant universities. We have a copy of our newsletter even thrown in the mix. So use the clues from those publications to ID what's on your table and kind of work through here. When you finish up what's on your table, move to another group of weeds. And we're going to rotate through and we'll regroup.
Good, why?
Yeah. Grade 4.
It might not be.
Could you pass me that
Oh,
one
look,
with
yeah.
the
Look,
pictures
it's
on
got a
it?
little serrated leaves.
Thanks. Yeah.
It's, let's see.
It's only half, and I'll go through half. Oh, there. Here's the spot. The surge right here.
Okay.
Yeah.
2, 3 is
2, 3.
spurred.
2, 3.
Spotted. Spurred. Do you have this weed? Yes, I do.
Yes, I do. Dr. Joe, I have a question for you.
Yes.
This weed right here, which we have not identified yet, but there is a native wildflower that has leaves that are very similar to this and has a really cute little pink flower on it. How do you tell the difference, or do you know what plant I'm talking about?
Yeah, mimosa weed is what that one's
Oh,
called.
it's called, it's a weed? It's actually a weed?
Yeah. Or, you know, it's usually because it's called mimosa weed, common name that I know it by, because people have it in their lawn and want to get rid of it.
Oh, okay.
But that's what it is related to this guy.
Okay,
Yeah.
oh, it is. Okay, all right. So how do you tell the difference between this and the mimosa weed? Because I think the mimosa weed is beautiful.
Yeah, or the flower is
Yes.
one thing on a lot of things. Once you get the flower, then you'll know.
Okay,
And,
so you gotta wait for it to
and
flower.
You can do some other examinations, like on this one,
Okay.
you'll start to see the way the leaf grows, and the way this one tends to grow upward.
Yes,
the
I
mimosa
noticed
weed
that.
tends to do
Yes,
this.
yeah.
So there's different things like
Okay,
that that will
all
help
right, good deal. Thank you.
you. You're welcome.
They're light pink or a red color. That's kind of a light pink or red color that the other two do not have. Not like corn. I would say that this one is the doveweed because we found a little flower and we got the color on it.
This looks rounded here, okay? Rounded, yeah.
So you think that's Virginia creeper?
I hope he's fine nose.
Yeah, so we've identified what's what. But this person answered those questions. Oh, okay, we filled it in. Okay.
What is the indicated issue we're going to find it on here?
Oh, I should mention the trace of
But it doesn't mention what is the best time of year. At some point. Could there be no good time of year then?
What issue is that indicating now? If it's an indicator,
Well, for
what's the
drainage.
issue that for drainage for the white clover?
No.
It can take dry
No,
soil
it's
too.
No, it can spread through seed, it spreads rapidly, wide range of soil. So it's almost like it's tolerant to all soil.
So go ahead and find your seats. Okay. So tray number 1 was the indicator plants. You guys ready to go through these? What was number 1? Dollar weed. Right. What's the indicated issue? If you see this? Poor drainage. Poor drainage. Yes, we see this all the time in people's lawns. And it's a wet lawn situation. It loves those wet soils. How about weed number 2? White clover. Indicated issue?
Low nitrogen.
Low nitrogen, and you could put soil compaction also. Yellow nutsedge was number 3. What is that an indicator of? Poor drainage. Poor drainage, that's right. What about number 4? What was it? Green Kalinga. What is it an indicator of? Poor drainage. Yeah, all these sedges, and I don't know if anyone felt it for the triangular stem. Did you guys get a chance to touch them? They usually like wet conditions. Now they can tolerate the dry, but they really go crazy in the wet. All right, number 2, tray number 2. What was the first plant? Chamber bitters. And don't be shy answering these. Do you have this weed at your house? Yeah. Okay, everyone does, right? What about number 2? Black nightshade. Do you have that at your house? Yep. And that's one that a lot of folks will confuse with volunteer tomato or tomatillo plants because it's a nightshade, right? So it looks very similar. The flowers look very similar as well. What about weed number 3? Spotted spurge. Who's got this one? We all have the full collection. What about weed number 4 on tray 2? The Asiatic hawksbeard. That's one that's often confused with dandelion, but they're not the same thing, right? 2-4 is Asiatic hawksbeard. That's going to be number 6. Yep. For 2-4, you could put the, yeah, that's the common name. You could put the botanical name off any of these sheets.
Is that japonica?
Yes. Yeah. What does japonica mean in Latin? Do you know that one?
Asian.
Asian, yep. What about number 5 on tray 2? What was it? Yeah, who's got this one? Everyone? Yeah. That's really more of a cool season weed, so we were kind of surprised to find it the other day. That's another one that's edible, right? It's got kind of a sour flavor to it. And then number 6 is that opium lettuce. Sometimes it's called milk thistle, milk lettuce, wild lettuce, prickly lettuce. I've heard it called all kinds of things on the internet. Natural painkiller. You didn't hear that from me, but if you're into herbalism, that's a very common one. Tray number 3 was the vines on the back table. What was the first one? Bush killer vine. Everyone's got that one, right? What about number 2? Morning glory. That's one that we have both native species of morning glory and we have invasive species of morning glory. And they also might be something you plant and put in your garden, right? So it can go all different directions. A weed is a plant out of place. So one man's weeds are another man's garden plant, right? There's several things on these tables that I actively cultivate in my gardens, and I'm sure you guys do too. But morning glory is one that can get very out of hand, right? What are you laughing at me for? That's not true, your wife does. That's true. Okay, number 3, and if she was here, she'd back me up. Number 3, what was it? Virginia creeper, right? And that Caradia japonica, the bush killer vine, and the Virginia creeper look very similar, right? How did you guys tell the two apart? The tendrils is one way. What about how the leaflets attach, right? Did anyone catch that? You just see it, right? A lot of these weeds are very familiar to us. How would we manage or control all 3 of those vines? Glyphosate, yeah, you could put cut in glyphosate or triclopyr, that bush and stump killer product. It comes in a little squeeze applicator bottle. So remember with vines, don't spray everything. We don't want to do that. That gets pesticides everywhere. Cut it, use that dab material, get that herbicide just on the cut, and usually you can get a little squeeze bottle with an applicator tip that you can squeeze it right on there. Or sometimes they come in a little jar with a paintbrush and you just paint a little bit on. Way better than using a gallon to spray all the foliage, right? So targeted application, IPM, use that herbicide as your last tool in the toolbox, but use it smartly. That's one management way. Okay, tray number 4. This was a little tricky because the morning class walked off with several of our articles, but I'm sure you guys have seen enough of these that we can kind of work our way through. What was number 1? The tallow tree. Yes. Is it native to Louisiana? No. It's the trash tree. But some people really like it. And one of the groups of people that really like it are beekeepers because it's one of the better pollen trees. Yep, believe it or not. Beekeepers love the tallow trees. They love Caradia too. That's one of them they also love. Great pollen, source for the beehives. What about number 2? What was it? Chinese elm, you could also put Drake elm, that's the cultivar of the Chinese elm. These things were brought in as ornamentals, they've kind of gone crazy. Uptown especially, you pull them forever. Native or not? Obviously not. What about number 3? That's our crepe myrtle. And fun fact, you have to have a permit to plant those in Florida now because they've gone so invasive. Native or not? No. Not native. However, it's everywhere. Everyone loves them. And they're from Southeast Asia as well. Many of our ornamentals and many of our weeds, it's a japonica. Many of our ornamentals, many of our weeds really like it here because they're from Southeast Asia where growing conditions are very similar. It's hot, it's humid, we get a lot of rainfall, the soils are very similar. So that's why these things become a problem here. With the crepe myrtles though, those beekeepers really love the crepe myrtles too because in the summer months, 80 to 90% of the pollen that the bees are collecting in this area is from just the crepe myrtles. That's a real powerhouse for the honeybee. Is the honeybee native? No? It's not. So that's a little preview for next week. Okay, number 4 and 5 on the weedy tree seedlings tray. This is where it gets a little confusing. We actually swapped some stuff out. What was number 4? It could be live oak, it could be water oak. Now with oak seedlings, it's really hard to tell because the juvenile leaves do change. They change with maturity. That's what makes IDing oaks especially hard. What was number 5? Shumard. Yeah, that's likely a Shumard oak. If anyone's interested in oaks and specifically native oaks to North America, if you Google North American Native Oak Guide, you will get a 200-page free PDF of all the native oak species in North America. It's awesome. I have it saved to my phone and to my laptop. Yeah, water oaks are extremely brittle and short-lived. A lot of them were planted in Jefferson Parish when those subdivisions were built, and now they're starting to fall through houses. You know, they're hollowed out, or they're just so old and brittle and decrepit. The best one's live oaks for this area, believe it or not, but we don't all have room for something that can sprawl over like 6 city lots. So yeah, live oaks, the Shumard oak is what's being planted on the neutral grounds a lot because it's a little more compact. It's got a traditional like lollipop tree form, and a little bit of fall color too. So that Shumard oak, Parks and Parkways is really loving it. Okay, tray 5, shady dealings. These are all shade lovers. What was number 1? Violet. So this is another one where we get people that say, I have to kill this in my lawn. I hate it. We got other people trying to plant it instead of a lawn. We've got people like me who have a nice little pot of it next to their Weber grill. So that's a weed in only the sense of if you think it's a weed, right? What's a good control method though if you do need to get rid of it? Herbicides, you can hand pull it, it's very easily hand pulled. What was that? Mowing it, yeah, it does not tolerate frequent mowing. What's number 2? Yellow wood sorrel. That's an edible also. The violet was as well. How do you control your yellow wood sorrel? Regular mowing, it doesn't like that. It's related to that oxalis on the other table. What about number 3? Indian or mock strawberry. That's one that botanically has nothing anywhere close to a real strawberry. You can eat the fruits, but they taste like cardboard. They're not very interesting. Little kids love them though. Yeah. How do you control it? Same thing, yeah. Frequent mowing takes care of a lot of these things, frequently. Tray 6 is the grasses. What was the first one? Goose grass. Yep, it's got kind of that flat center. Did everybody get a chance to see that? It spreads out. It's an indicator plant too. Joe, you want to tell them what it's an indicator of?
It's an indicator of hard compaction.
Compacted soil. So we dug this up.
To do with dirt roads.
Yep, dirt roads. We found this next to a sidewalk where people were walking off the path. Oftentimes we'll find it in the lawn where like if somebody is using the same pathway or the same route to move from one building to their car or from building to building, and you know how you get those little cow trails through the lawn, that's where this pops up. When do you control it? What time of year?
Winter.
Yep, that's a winter controlled one. What about number 2? What is it? Wavy leaf basket grass. And this is one, if you were logged into that Master Gardener meeting Monday, they were talking about as a shade ground cover. Plant with caution, it does run into absolutely everything. It's very aggressive. What's the best time of year to control the basket grass? Anytime. Yep, that's anytime. And it is actually easily pulled. You could use an herbicide as well. What was number 3? Crabgrass. When do we want to control the crabgrass?
Late January.
Want to start in the fall, go through the winter months. If it looks like that, it's too late. Guess what? Everyone who's calling, texting, emailing about crabgrass in their lawns right now, not a lot they can do about it. They can get out there and try to dig it. They could go out there with a little bottle of Roundup and try to get it that way, but then you end up with a dead patch in the lawn. Control happens in the dormant season, the cool season. What was number 4? This one's famous. Torpedo grass. Yep. When do we control it? Anytime, whenever you see it. It's extremely hard to control. Okay, and tray 7, last but not least, the spreading weeds. What was number 1? Doveweed is the right answer. And this one was a little tricky. We grouped these together because they're very similar. The giveaway with the doveweed is it's the one that looks the most like the turf grass. That's the clue, if you read through that fact sheet. The others are all very obviously broadleafs, but if that doveweed's mixed into a lawn, you might think it's just more grass, right? And that was actually in that fact sheet. What's number 2? Purslane. Yep, that's edible. Someone was telling me they're selling it on the farm. Yep, if you can get money for it, that's great. It is edible, and it's used in a lot of Middle Eastern cuisines. What was number 3? The spiderwort, Trans-Xanthia. There's a lot of different ones. This is something that is an ornamental, but it can also be a weed, right? So that's one that we could go both ways on. What's number 4? That's the Virginia buttonweed, and it's really active right now. So if you have a lawn, chances are you've got it somewhere. Any questions about those?
Will you post all of these?
I can post them, yep.
Okay, and will you post the edible ones next time?
The what?
Edible?
Yes, I can also refer to you, if you're interested in eating the weeds, there's a website called Eat the Weeds. It's awesome. It's a blog style with recipes. They usually choose 1 weed per week. They tell you how to correctly identify it, what it's used for, what it is related to botanically. It's just a good website. So eattheweeds.com. Next week is entomology. We're here. We're going to cover pesticide safety too, because if we're using even organic pesticides, we need to be safe. They can burn us too. Make sure when you leave, you grab a little glass vial off the back table. They're in those cardboard boxes. Your homework for next week is to capture and kill an insect pest from your garden. It can also be a beneficial pest if you would like, but we're not looking for the things that everyone's got. So don't bring your leaf-footed bugs. The unusual stuff is good. It can be a soft-bodied insect, a hard-bodied insect. It could be a mollusk, a spider, whatever is interesting to you. If it's a hard-bodied critter, put it in the freezer after you put it in the jar and then bring it to class. That's how we humanely kill them without using the professional system, okay? If it's a soft-bodied thing, like a caterpillar or a snail or a spider or a larva of any kind, put it in rubbing alcohol. So just fill that little jar up with a little rubbing alcohol and then bring it to class. That's how we preserve it. Huh? The freezer does work, but it actually, the soft body stuff kind of falls apart over time. So that's the best way to preserve it. And we're going to be looking at a lot of different insects and hopefully identifying what you guys bring. Can we leave it in the alcohol? You can leave it in the alcohol. Yeah, if it's a soft-bodied insect or a soft-bodied critter, leave it in the alcohol when you bring it to class. Yep. All right. You guys are free.